Hello and welcome to a tutorial lesson on passive voice in English, passive voice in Spanish, and saying personal. Why do we use passive voice? To start with, when we want to announce new information, that is when we want to give news. In a sentence such as, nice picture, yes, it was painted by my grandmother, the news is the painter. And that's why we use passive voice. With long, heavier expressions, when we want to present important information, we do it first. And we put the long expression at the end. She was delighted by the huge orange sun sinking slowly below the horizon is much more straightforward than the first option. We also use passive voice when the agent is unknown. In She Was Murdered, we don't know who did the murdering action. When the agent is obvious, or when the agent is not important or irrelevant. And this is what you will usually find in academic and scientific writing. When we want to describe commercial, industrial, and scientific procedures, it is also very common to encounter passive voice expressions. And of course, when we describe historical, economic, and social processes. The currency has been devalued twice since the war. When we don't mention the agent, one of the reasons might be because we want to avoid directly blame somebody or avoid personal responsibility. In the vase has been broken, we avoid directly pointing at somebody, blaming somebody. We also want to describe a general feeling or an opinion which is not ours when we don't mention the agent. And this is one of the most important reasons why we use passive voice, to detach ourselves from what is being said. Some basic patterns that you can't forget passive voice includes are an object, which is the object of the active voice, becomes the subject in the passive. This house was built in 1486 is the object of built in the first sentence. However, when the subject of the active voice is presented in passive voice construction, we present it using the preposition by. And here the subject has got the name of the agent. This house was built in 1486 by Sir John Latton. By Sir John Latton, that is the agent. There are a number of instances where we cannot make use of passive voice, and one of them, the most important, is with verbs which have no direct object. Our direct object is the subject in the passive voice, and so if there is no direct object, passive voice cannot take place. So she arrived at the hotel early in the morning cannot become she was arrived, because arrive is an intransitive verb. With stative verbs, have, belong, resemble, seem, and so on, we cannot have passive voice either. They have a nice house can never be a nice house is had by them. With verbs of wanting and liking, we cannot use passive voice. Basically, in English, we form the passive voice by the appropriate tense use of the verb to be, plus the past participial form of the main verb. This is a chart which I extracted from Practical English Usage for you to have a look at, with the different forms of the passive voice with the different tenses, some basic tenses. You have to remember that let has no passive voice. Instead, we use allow, permit, or give permission in the passive. So, the teacher let us leave early becomes we were allowed to leave earlier by the teacher. Of course, by the teacher is optional. Here, see, make, and help do not take to in the active voice, but they do take to in passive voice constructions. So, I saw he come out of the house becomes he was seen to come out of the house. Multi-word verbs, that is, phrasal verbs, are not separated. That is, the verb and the particle, the verb and the preposition are not separated in passive voice. So we can never say the company was taken by them over in 2001. Future progressive passives and perfect progressive passives are unusual. Instead, we use an active form and an impersonal subject, such as they or one. Get, which is possible in informal speech, can be used instead of the verb to be when unusual or unexpected actions are described. However, get cannot be used to describe states, so we can never say that house gets owned by my uncle. With verbs with two objects, that is, with direct and indirect objects, we can have two forms of the passive voice, because we can make either the indirect object or the direct object the subject of the passive. However, indirect objects fronted are more common than direct objects. So her sister was given the car is more common than the car was given to her sister. Sometimes we can also drop the preposition, that is, we can take away the preposition. So this watch was given to me can also become this watch was given me by my grandfather. Verbs suggest and explain are not used with indirect objects as subjects. So the problem was explained to the children can never be the children were explained the problem. One of the main reasons why we use passive voice is because we want to sound more impersonal. That is, we want to detach ourselves, as I said before, from the opinion that we are uttering. Yes? That's why we never compromise our opinion if we use impersonalization, passive voice, and that's why you will also encounter many instances of passive voice in essays, in academic essays. So there are three basic ways in which we can sound more impersonal. With subject, a passive verb, and to infinitive, as in, he was said to be innocent, a preparatory it, in it was decided that it would be too costly, or a preparatory there. And here I included the equivalents in Spanish, because in Spanish we use this se impersonal, the particle se, to sound more detached from the opinion we are conveying. With ing forms, we can also use passive with an ing added to the verb to be plus a past participial form, or with a perfect ing, with an ing added to the auxiliary for the perfective aspect plus the participial form of the verb to be, and of course with the past participle. With two infinitives, it is also possible to encounter passive voice, verb to be plus past participle, or a perfective plus a past participle, or in reported speech with ask for followed by an object. Inspector Pascoe asked for the prisoner to be held in the cells overnight. Or we can also use a passive infinitive or an active form after the verb need. So we can have the cage really needs to be cleaned, or the cage really needs cleaning. Let's turn now to passive voice in Spanish. So in Spanish, we the form of the passive voice is the particle ser plus the participial form of the main verb. Ser agrees in person and number with the subject of the sentence, but ser can also change tense accordingly. So we can have ser in past, present, or future. The participle, the main verb in the participle, agrees in person and number, and it also inflects gender. So in las joyas fueron vendidas, vendidas agrees in gender with joyas, and in el poste será colocado mañana, colocado agrees in gender with el poste, with the subject el poste. In Spanish, we also have se impersonal as a form of the passive voice. This is passive voice in English. So in Spanish, it's more common to use se impersonal rather than the structure with fue plus participial form. And we never mention the agent with se impersonal. In Spanish, se requires a verb in the third person plural or singular. So we can have sentences such as se pintaron muchos cuadros durante la época, se colocó un poste de luz en la esquina, where pintaron agrees in the third person plural and colocó agrees in the third person singular. Well, thank you so much for watching. Please consult your SWAM Practical English Usage, the section on passives, and Advanced Learners Grammar, your section on passives, causatives, and get. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.